Live, and let's see how is that setting up your meeting for Facebook Live. Come on, come on, come on. And let's see, live on Facebook, and we're going to Zoom, and we are live, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Laughter for All podcast. I am Comedian Nazareth, and I thank you for taking the time to spend this hour with us. Hope you guys had a great weekend, and I am excited because I have uh, a friend of mine, and these people know about marriage. They are believers, and they wrote a book called The Marriage Dance, and they have an ebook that we will send to anyone who's watching with us on Facebook. And if you are listening to this podcast later on and you want to request it, we'll give you the information that's needed to do that. So, Bob and Roxanne Andersen, let me introduce you officially. Well, for Bob, he has been an attorney for over 38 years, and he favors finding a solution to dunk in and out in court. And he's a mediator, but he's a peacemaker. So, I'm a peacemaker. I love peacemakers. So instead of going to court all the time and just trying to defend one or the other or winning a case, he started mediating and said, okay, let's have a peacemaking, let's have a solution and mediate and come to that. And that's perfect for marriage too. So, and he finds the principles of conflict resolution work just as well with your spouse. Bob and Roxanne write about marriage and speak at conferences, seminars, and retreats. And they have a weekly Sunday school class at Magnolia Church in Riverside. Welcome to the program, Bob and Roxanne. How are you? Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having us on, Nazareth. We enjoy it.
And how did you guys meet? Bob, were you an attorney when you met Roxanne?
Oh, we were both students at UCLA many years ago. We've been married 44 years now.
Wow. Students aware at UCLA?
Yes.
That's where my daughter attends right now, of course, virtually. But yeah, UCLA Bruins, good. And
Yes.
what were
Yes.
you were
Go
you
Bruins.
were were you studying law?
I have studied law. I've studied the Bible. I've studied public administration. I studied economics. I've studied a variety of things, trying to figure it out. Law is what I've been doing for the last 40 years. And now I'm focusing on mediation specifically.
And Roxanne,
When we met, we were just students at UCLA, and
Undergrads.
yeah, undergrads. And Bob was in a Christian fraternity, and I was in a Christian sorority, and they often had activities together. And so that's how we met. We did not go out with each other for a long time, and actually, the first date that we had was a disaster. It was just a disaster.
what happened? Of course, it's laughter for all. Tell us.
Well, we had activities together, and so Bob didn't date much, and his roommate decided to do a kind deed for him and set him up with a date, me. And when Bob found out about it, he wasn't very happy because he hadn't planned on going to the event. And it turned out it was on April 1st, and it was a hayride. And so about an hour before the hayride and the guys were going to come and get us, we get a phone call from the fraternity saying, you know what, we couldn't get a wagon and the hayride's canceled. And so we thought what probably all of your listeners are thinking, April Fools. And so we just sat and waited, and it was a school night. And as the time went on, we were like, come on, guys, where are you? This is a school night. and so we finally called back, and they said, we told you it was canceled. And we're like, well, yeah, that's what you said, but we didn't believe it. So at that point, Bob felt stuck with this date. He got this other guy in the fraternity and his date, and found a movie that we could go see. He figured, he owed me a date. And so we went to see Wuthering Heights. Not your typical date movie. This gothic movie. So anyway, he sat there fuming, and I sat there feeling like I was just trying to be nice, by going out with him, and so that he'd have a date for the event. So we really didn't date for another 2 years after that.
After that,
Yeah.
what attracted you to him after those 2 years? I mean, what was the attraction?
You know what? I joined Little Sisters for his fraternity, and one of the things that I saw was that when we were at a Bible study, and usually whoever was chaplain that year would lead the study, when a question came up and they didn't know the answer, all the heads in the room would turn to Bob, and they just knew he knew, and he would very quietly, give an answer. That was one thing. Another thing was there was a girl in my sorority, and she was very homely. He did not date ever. And when it came to her senior year, all the girls got around her and said, come on, you should go to this last event, this last banquet. Everybody's asking a date, ask someone. And so we made a recommendation. And so she got up all her nerve and called, and the guy said, oh, I think I'm going to be out of town. And then she was like, see, just forget it. We said, no, try this other guy, and he'll go. And the same thing happened. And she finally packed up her bags that weekend and went home and never even went to her senior banquet. Talking about this, a long time later with another gal who we had both been in the sorority at the time. And she said, you know what, she knew I was interested in Bob at that point. She said, if she had asked Bob Andersen, he would have said yes and made sure she had a good time. And I thought, those were just some of the things. That's the kind of person I wanted.
That's so, Bob. What attracted you to Roxann? Even though you guys for 2 years they didn't.
Yeah, I was pretty shy. I wasn't interested much in marriage at all at first. So it took me a while before I even got interested in reaching the subject of asking a girl out. So it was kind of a slow process, but I liked Roxann, and I think she liked me. And I think the fact that she liked me helped a lot because I lacked confidence, and that gave me some confidence. She was a godly woman. We memorized scripture together. We ran around the track together. We just did things together. And initially, it wasn't a dating relationship at all. It was just kind of like a friendship relationship. And it just kind of grew.
Now, too, who Bob really appreciated, admired. Her name was Sharon. And I think at one point, Bob, if I'm not mistaken, Sharon said, Bob, it's time for you to get to know some girls.
Yeah. And this is probably funny for all the women in your group. So I made a goal. In January, I'd ask one girl out, one girl a month. So in January, I asked someone out. In February, I asked Roxann out. And in March, she asked me to her date. So that's when it started. I mean, that was 2 in a row. I was hooked. So being as shy as I was, and we were good friends, and I was needing some confidence, I loved her smile. I mean, I think the smile just did a lot.
This is a good encouragement for single people. Listen to this, single people. Bob made a goal, like once a month, he's going to ask a person out. See, some people get shy and they never ask. If you make it a goal, single guy and single gal, if you make it a goal, like once a month, I'm gonna go on a date. You know what? By March, you'll probably be married.
We were at least going together.
Now, how long did you guys date before you got married?
A little over 2 years. We started in March, and then we got married in June 2 years later.
And is it
the formal dating?
Formal dating.
We knew each other for 7 years, though.
What do you think? Is it true that they say that the first year of marriage is the hardest? Is that true?
That's a good question. What I've heard is the first 7 years of marriage are hard.
Okay, I was trying to be nice to them.
Okay.
And then we have this one friend who says it's the first 20 years that are the hardest.
Yeah, you have to get through 20 years. It's a snap after that. So yeah, all of a sudden you're put together and there's no timeouts. You can't walk away and say, oh, I'll think about this later. It's like you're in the hopper, and if a conflict comes up, you kind of need to deal with it. For both Roxann and I, our styles were to avoid conflict. So instead of yelling at each other, we would kind of go off to our corner and not talk about it, which is also a poor form of conflict. But that's kind of how we dealt with conflict. And then we get back together after a few days, and it didn't necessarily get resolved because we still didn't talk about it.
Part of the adjustment, I think, was that we were really in a different situation than both of us had been used to. Bob had come out of a fraternity house with probably, I don't know, 20, 25 guys in it, and all living in close proximity. I was in an apartment with 5 girls in a 2-bedroom apartment. If you wanted to even have a private conversation, you had to go out and sit on the stairs. I mean, and to go from that to a 4-bedroom house, actually, with one person who was studying law all the time, it was a loneliness. And so you think, oh, you get married and this is going to be, great and companionship. No, but it was a lonely time. And then you add to that, we were poor. I mean, we were poor. Bob was in law school. I had, a very basic job at the time. And everybody in our church just about was a long distance call. So I couldn't even afford that. And I remember one day, and then I went to work in a 1-girl office. That was my job. And one of the things that Bob did was he knew I was really down, and he took the church directory. They had them in print in those days.
I remember that.
Went through and marked each telephone number that was not a long distance call. And he said, look, here's some people you can call. So I really appreciated just that he was hearing me and thinking and considering my feelings and thinking about that.
So how long did that last until he graduated and got his passed the bar? Did that change after that?
Yes.
Then we moved to Riverside, and it was a major change, but we were still poor.
But the first year, that was it. And I was working. By the second year, we had a daughter. And so we had already decided I was going to stay home with our kids. And so that made us even more poor. But I was now able to, go out during the day and participate with the other women at church. So it did get better in that respect. So it was really just that first year that was.
Now, when you're talking, I know I'm a peacemaker too. Sometimes okay, let's not talk about the issue. I mean, how do you talk about every issue you disagree with your spouse, or do you just pick your battles?
Yeah, well, picking your battles is a good point. I mean, if it's a really picky, why waste energy on something that just isn't important to you? So you don't fight about everything. I mean, one of the first questions is this important enough to even address, or is it just something that it's a minor irritation? Let's forget it.
What do you think, Roxann?
And what I was going to say is I think there's a time to address it also, and some times are better than others. So I know for one golden nugget we got from Bob's mom is she said whenever she had something with a little weight to it to talk to his dad, it was always better if she waited until after he had been fed. So that was one. But, if we're tired, if we're in a rush, that's not the moment. So you might just say, you know what, I'm going to need to talk to you about this, but let's not do it right now. But let's not forget about it either.
Especially me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, especially me. I have a time issue. And if I'm ready to walk out the door and Roxann brings up the subject right at that time, that doesn't go very well. So it's definitely an opportunity to say, can we talk about it later, or deal with it somehow and say, this is an important enough subject to talk about. Let's set a time for it, but this isn't the time because I'm walking out the door right now.
I read a study, which is true. They said, whenever you're hungry, you are more irritated. When you're hungry and tired, you're irritated. So, it's more chance of picking a fight. So they always say, wait till you have dinner and then you can discuss issues. That's why I always keep a Snickers bar in my back pocket. So if my wife, Maha, she said, hey, we have an issue, we need to talk about it. Like, Here's a Snickers bar, and we'll talk after that. Or let's go. Oh, let's discuss this over a cheesecake or something. But that's true. But what do you say, Bob, to a man who is saying, okay, or a woman, and I'll ask Roxanne as well. You say, oh, we're godly. I'm a godly person. I'm a godly husband. I'm a godly wife. You know what? Even though this is irritating me, Lord, I'm here to sacrifice my life. I'm here to surrender my life to her, or I surrender my life to him. What do you say to someone like that who's thinking in that way?
The first question, I think, is humility versus pride. I think God has designed marriage to have that pride, humility issue come out. And if you decide, I want to do it my way, and I don't care what my spouse wants to do, you're in serious, serious trouble. So I have to communicate what I would like, and Roxanne needs to communicate what she likes. But there's actually a third alternative, which is, what do we decide to do? And it may not be what I want to do, it may not be what she wants to do, but we can come up with a joint suggestion of how we are going to deal with this in the future. And there are things that come up all the time. And I mean, every day, something new that seems picky that may explode into something that's not so picky. So I do think that God is in marriage to make us more mature. And if we decide we want an extraordinary marriage, and we both want that, and we both want to work toward it, it's going to take effort on both parts. But I think it's possible to have an extraordinary marriage when both people really want it.
Mm. What do you think, Roxanne?
Yeah, I think that when an obstacle comes up, a disagreement comes up, I really think I'm right. I just do.
He does.
And I'm sure Bob thinks he's right. And so my prayer is, Lord, I need to hear from you. Would you, and here's one benefit of being married to a believer. Lord, would you tell Bob what he needs to hear? It is much better coming from God than it is from me. I can tell him, but it is better received from God. And on the other side, Lord, will you tell me what I need to hear? Because right now, I think I'm right.
And there's a really great prayer when we're in conflict, and that is to pray, Lord, what's best for your kingdom? And that way, we both have to give up what we think and just sit there and listen. Maybe God has a better idea than either one of us. So we're not necessarily holding on to our viewpoint, but we're willing to listen to God and see if he's got a better idea. And that at least changes the attitude, and it makes you more flexible. And if he drops an idea on this situation, you go, hey, that's a good idea.
You know, the reason I asked this question, because, you know, I lived in different countries around the world. I have a ministry to refugees, and in marriages in different parts of the world, and especially even people who come here and live here, you notice more the wife is more sacrificial. She's like, the husband has this narcissistic attitude. It's all about that. But she teach you that in the Middle East and other countries. Like, you know, the man is the in charge. The man, you know, whatever he wants. Your job as a spouse is to serve him, and you grow up with that. And then we notice it. They move to this country, and still the wife, especially if she's a Christian believer, and I know some women are watching right now and listening. She goes, well, you know what? Maybe God wants me to submit. God wants me to submit. What's the healthiest way to of submission, or from either spouse, the man or the woman?
We've got a lot to say on that subject.
Go ahead.
Number one, a man needs to submit to God anyway. In Ephesians 5, where there's the picture of the church, it's like a woman is to submit to the husband, but the church is to submit to Christ. And Paul says, it sounds like I'm talking about marriage, but really I'm talking about Christ and the church. So there is an absolute symbolic relationship there. And Christ is very gentle. He's very listening. And he gave his life for us. And the passage says we need to be willing to give our life for our wives. So for a husband to take a macho point of view, that's not the biblical point of view. That there is something in leadership which is very, very good. But there's something in autocratic leadership that is very, very bad. So the question is not who's the leader. The question is the leader a good leader or a bad leader? And there's a huge difference there. And usually I'll ask people, have you ever had a teacher that was really good, or a coach that was really good, or one of your parents, or somebody that was just a really great leader? Didn't you like the way how they led? And invariably, if they thought they were a good leader, they thought they were really good. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, have you ever known anybody that was a bad leader? Yes. So, I mean, and did they cause problems? Yes. So the question is not leadership. The question is whether it's good leadership or bad leadership. And if you can influence the husband to say, I want to be a good leader, that takes care of a couple of problems. Number one, the wife will feel protected and loved, and you'll make good decisions. So he needs to pursue good leadership is what he needs to pursue. Phil had to say on this too.
We learned a lot about this when we took a ballroom dance class.
That's interesting.
What we saw was when you take the class, a group class, they always make you rotate, and they say it's so that you can dance, feel what it's like dancing with different partners. We think it was because there were always more women than men, but anyway, so you would rotate around the room. And the interesting thing is, if you talk even in the church and you say, you bring up the topic of submission, there are going to be a certain number of women, probably ones who have had a very bad leader over them, a dominant, controlling, not generous leader over them, and they're reacting to it. And they're like, well, why do I have to submit? But the Bible clearly says that. But in dance, no, none of the women ever say, why do I have to follow this man? If he is a good leader and knows what he's doing, and he's a generous leader who is focused on his partner, everybody wants to dance with him. Everyone wants to follow him. And it's not even a question. It's the bad leaders that they don't want to dance with. And I'll give you one example. There was a class that we were taking on East Coast swing, and there was a man who came to that class. It was the only class he ever came to. And he was there. He thought he was all that, and he was there to show himself off. And East Coast swing is a fast dance, and you're whipping each other kind of around. And because he was focused on himself, he was actually hurting his partners. You turn someone too fast or too wild, and you're going to yank their shoulder out. And here was the consequence. When the teacher said to rotate and the women would rotate to him, they would say, excuse me, I'm going to have to go to the restroom. So he'd be standing there by himself. And then when the teacher would say rotate again, the next lady would say, I'm sorry, I need to go to the restroom. And no one would dance with him. And so you go to dance class, that's a sad story. But if your spouse doesn't want to dance with you in marriage, that's really bad. So it is a matter of being a good partner, a partner who's focused on the other person. There's another thing about following or submitting, and that is, I think our culture has a very wrong view of what it is, and they view someone who submits as weak. And that's not true at all. I mean, if you think of Jesus and he submitted to the Father, he was not weak at all. And in the same way, a dancer, when she follows her partner, she cannot be weak. It's a very strong position, but there has been an agreement that he's going to pick the steps and the direction, and she's going to follow them. It's an agreement. And so you put yourself in that position, but she's very strong. She's got to be very competent, very proficient. So this is what I recommend to women when they say, well, what if I disagree with my husband? Because you are going to disagree with him. You will. It's going to happen. I would say, Bob, I hear what you're saying. I want you to know that I disagree. And in fact, I can back up a minute. I would start by saying, I want you to know that to the best of my ability, I'm going to follow you and support you and do what you have to say. But I see the following problems. When we've tried this in the past, this has happened. I see that this could be an obstacle or a problem when it comes, and just lay it out. And I think honestly, if a wife doesn't do that, she's shirking her responsibility, the strength and gifts and insight that God's given her. She's shirking her responsibility if she doesn't warn him, show him, lay it out. So lay them out. And then again, I would say, but I want you to know, to the best of my ability, I'm going to support what you have to say. And here's what it does. You just took the fight out, right? There's no fight left because you just agreed to support him. But it also puts that husband in a position where he's going to really want to be right. If it is completely up to him at this point, he better go to God and seek what's right and best and try to do that, and not just make some kind of flippant decision or self-centered decision. So that's the advice we give.
That's wonderful.
We rely on Jesus for making good decisions for us, and then we have to follow them. But if the husband is, following Christ, if he's in a subservient position to Christ, following what he's asking him to do, it's a whole lot more likely that it's going to be a good decision. He's going to be a good leader. But in either event, the woman really does need to articulate what the problem is, not just be quiet. Just say, I see these problems, and talk about it. I think they do need to be talked about. I told you at the beginning that both of us would kind of go to our corner and not talk about it. That doesn't solve anything. That just puts it under the rug. You do need to talk about it. And a strong woman doesn't have to yell at her husband, but just say, look, here are the problems I see. I've seen this in the past. You've done this 5 times in a row. Why do you want to do it a 6th time? You can say it nicely, but you do need to say it. But if it then comes down on the husband to say, okay, I have to make a decision, he's going to think twice about, okay, if this happens a 6th time, the way it happened the last 5 times, that's a pretty dumb decision on my part. You need him to think it through and hopefully to pray it through.
Right. Some people, we just joined us. They don't. I said in the beginning, you guys wrote the book, the Marriage Dance, and you started. Roxanne, you spoke about one example of the leading and following. What other things about that you compare dance with marriage?
We start off with embracing your differences. And if you can picture a beautiful couple out on a ballroom dance floor, they are very different from each other. Very, very different. And typically, if you go to, let's just say, a competition, it's interesting that all the men are wearing a black tuxedo jacket and they look just alike. The only difference is they have a number on their back to identify them. Women have maybe a custom made gown, but it's all very individual gowns. You would not want to show up with the same gown as one of the other contestants. And it's just fascinating to watch. But and when they get out on the floor, they're doing very different things. And the man, he's calling the steps and so forth, not out loud, but directing the steps. But he provides, let's see if I can get in here. I can't. A structure for a framework. And so the man is the frame and the woman is this picture. And he is deciding the steps, but she's the one with all the beauty. She's the one that makes the dance beautiful. If you watch only the man's part, it's pretty dull. She's the one who's turning and kicking and who is all adorned, And at any rate, you have two people and they're very, very different and they're doing different things, but they have to move together as one in harmony. And they're in very close proximity when they're doing it. And that's kind of the way it is in marriage as well. You probably are very different than your spouse. You probably picked them because you know that they filled the places that you had a hole. The things that you're not very good at, they're probably excellent at. They go to a party and you're not the one who knows what to say or feels comfortable in a crowd, but your spouse does, you know, and you're really, really different. And so sometimes those differences are magnificent if you embrace them. If you say, yeah, we're different, but this can work really well together, that's a good thing. If you let the differences act as an irritation, well, why are you doing that? You know, then that's a bad thing. So the idea is to say, yes, we're different. How does this work together? So I can give you an example. Bob is writing a book right now.
Oh.
It is not about marriage at all. It's not about law. It's a book about the author of Hebrews, and he's been working on it for a while. Bob.
Oh, you figured him out? I don't know who he is yet. I'd say Paul, but I'm not sure.
I'll give you a copy of the book when it's done.
Okay, good.
But Bob has the ideas and he lays them out spectacularly well. This is something I could never do. However, my writing style is probably more readable, more clear than Bob's. So if you take,
I admit that.
If you take either of us separately, and we are very different, the book's not going to get done. But you put us together and say, okay, we're different. I'm not going to let that get to me. We're going to use it. And then it works really well.
I know the idea I want to convey, but my sentences and paragraphs get tangled up. It comes off flowing from her mouth. So she does it really well. Another example of that is on the dance floor when they're competing. Sometimes there'll be one competitor in each couple and the teacher is the other one. And if the teacher is the man, the couple looks different than when the teacher is the woman because they're different roles. The man is the structure. He calls the dance steps. So you can see this, the dance is much more structured. But when the woman's the teacher, she's out there doing the twists and turns and flares and all that kind of stuff. And you know, she looks spectacular, but it's just a different role. And it's easier to see. Sorry. And when you see that there's different roles and different personalities, you just have to deal with that in marriage. And that's where part of the humor is. If your perspective is, this is an irritant, then you'll be irritated. If your perspective is, this is funny, you can make jokes about it and laugh about it and say, you're different than I am. And it can be actually a source of great humor. And you're not focusing on the irritation, but you're laughing about it because you know you're different. And that's actually not bad. It's actually good that you're not that you're different.
Do you think laughter is important in marriage?
Yeah, and that's one place where you can really have it, is just laugh at your differences. Just recognize, like, I like chocolate, she likes vanilla, and we just kind of tease each other about it. Sometimes it can be irritating, but usually it's just a joke.
So we talked about leading and following. The second thing we talked about is, what do you call it? Embrace your differences. What else in the book that you compare dance to marriage?
One thing that happens when you're on the dance floor is if you're not doing the steps correctly, you're going to step on each other's toes. And that hurts. And when you're in marriage, that same phrase has kind of a different meaning, stepping on each other's toes. And there are certain things that happen and you just bang into each other. It can be the same problem area all the time. Every time you get to that, you can just count on it. There's going to be an explosion, or someone's going to be disgruntled, or whatever it is. So there are two particular arenas really, that we see that cause the problems and cause you to step on your partner's toes. And one is the area of sin that just hasn't been resolved. In our book, we look at 6 areas. Any sin will do you in. Some take longer to do you in than others. But let's just take the idea of lack of forgiveness. And your spouse does something, they may hurt you. Again, we're all human. It's going to happen. Are you going to hold that grudge, or are you going to forgive the way God tells us to? And so if you're going to hold that grudge, then any time that situation comes up, or really even that emotion is provoked, again, and here comes the problem all over again. Take the area, and it doesn't even have to be specifically a lack of forgiveness against your spouse. Let's say you haven't forgiven your brother for the way he always used to treat you, or your father for the way, for something that he did, and that grudge is just being held on to. The first time your spouse does something that makes you feel the same way, you respond exactly the same way to your husband or your spouse as you did to that parent or sibling or whoever it was.
That's interesting.
So until that forgiveness is let go of, you're going to keep spinning downward in the same cycle.
And one of the problems is if both partners have a wound or an issue in an area, and you're on that issue at the same time, so that when the wife says something to the husband, it's hurting the husband's wound or issue. And when the husband says something back to the wife, it's hurting the wife's wound or issue. And you just kind of go in a circle, and you can never get out of the circle because you're defending yourself from the attack that you feel is an attack and attacking back. And you get into this spiral circle of going downhill. And it's kind of like you're trying to step on each other's toes at that point. And you've got to get out of that cycle. And basically, you need to find out where the wound is and try and heal it, instead of going through that same conversation again 20 times in 3 years.
If you can just picture 2 dancers out on the floor, and one of them just pounds on the other one's toes and stomps on it, and so the other one stomps back, and so the first one stomps back. I mean, that's ugly, but that's exactly what happens in marriage a lot of times, and one just, you get in an area that hurts them and they retaliate in whatever way that they do, whether it's anger or maybe withdrawing, or, maybe they handle it by going out and eating a pint of ice cream, or, whatever it is. It's like, there's pain in my life, and now I'm going to handle this myself. And sometimes that handling it involves taking it out and stepping on that spouse's toe.
Now, you've been married for what, 40, how many years?
44 years. 44.
What was your 44? What was your biggest challenge in your marriage? What was one issue where you went, I don't know if we can apply what we're teaching to it?
I can tell you one. I'm not sure it's the biggest issue, but one, when I was in law school, I spent almost all my time in the academic, intellectual world, and spent almost no time in the emotional world. And so because of a wound I had, and because I was in that environment, I kind of suppressed my emotions. And so I didn't even know how I felt. You could ask me, how did you feel today? And I'd say, I'm doing fine, just like yesterday, just like the last 25 years, because I really didn't know what I was feeling. And so when you are then trying to connect with your spouse, it's a little difficult not to have those emotions which God gave you. God gave us emotions for a purpose. And there's a lot of men that don't want to go there or don't think they have to go there. So the question sometimes I ask is, well, why did God give us emotions? And, usually the emotions are there to tell us we have a spiritual problem. Do you not want to know if you have a spiritual problem? So, and also joy. If God's going to give us joy, if you can't feel your emotions, you can't feel the joy. So one of my issues through my life is to try to get back in touch with my emotions. And it's not exactly easy for me. So that's one of the issues on my side.
That's the issue a lot with surgeons, doctors, attorneys, account. Yeah, so that's a big issue for men sometimes, especially from other countries. They don't want to. They think it's weakness to feel things. And Roxanne, how did you handle that?
I think I just kind of withdrew a little bit. Well, I guess he doesn't want to connect with me. That's how it felt. And so then I would back up. And I would say it was actually, we went to an advanced training seminar for a marriage for a man in Colorado Springs. And the way in which he trained you was you had to agree to be counseled in front of the other 9 couples who were present.
Wow.
And it took a very short time for him to say, you've got some issues here. And he showed us how your spouse can actually work with you through them. And he called it speaking to the heart. It's the area of emotional intimacy, which whenever we put out a survey, that always comes out number 1 of what people are most interested in. How do I connect with my spouse? And so what we saw was there was a great connection from Bob just sitting and listening to me, telling him things that I had never told anybody about. And he sat there and listened. He sat there and let me cry for a couple of months and was just patient and caring. And that really drew us together. Then I tried to return the favor. And as it was a story that he was just telling you, what emotions, and it was like talking to a wall there and very hard to get through. So then we had to find some other ways to access Bob and what he was feeling and just where did that feeling come from? Because when you know that, then you will know a great deal about why your spouse reacts to you the way that they do. So,
I did a whole a comedy bit about sometimes wives want us to be open and sensitive and share our feelings. And then when you start opening up, she goes, "Come on, man up! Don't be a sissy." but but so I always tell men, if you want to cry and open up, do it while you're cutting onions or something. Because somehow some wives don't want to see the husband crying or feeling weak or feeling. Is that true? Does that make sense?
there are times when I want Bob to be strong, but I think there are times when I have really appreciated knowing what it is that affects him and why. There was a situation that early on when we would talk, and I would think he was done talking, and so I would start talking. He'd go, "You're always interrupting me," and it was like this huge, this little infraction, this huge response, which is a clue. And it turns out as we go back there, and just growing up, he felt cut off a lot, not listened to a lot. So all I had was remind him of that a little bit, and then you get this big reaction. So just knowing where it's coming from, then I could go back and say to him, you know what, I never want to cut you off. I want to know what you have to say. I think you say good things, but I didn't mean to cut you off.
Right. Bob, what do you say to a husband who doesn't want to feel emotional? So what he does is he spends all his day at work, gets up early, goes to work, comes home really late, just in the name of like, I'm the husband, I'm the provider.
Men were made for a relationship too. They know it. but it doesn't sink in as far as it needs to sink in. I think they know that on their deathbed, they don't want to just be known for the number of buildings that they build. One of the movies that shows this is the movie's Castaways, where if you've seen it, Tom Hanks was a FedEx person. Talk about work, get it done on time, never be late. And then he winds up in this deserted island in the middle of the South Pacific with nobody on it. And you can just see his craving for some kind of relationship, even with a volleyball, because men are made for a relationship. And I think a lot of times I'll say in a meeting, okay, I don't want the women to answer this question. I just want the men to answer this question. And I ask them, were you made for a relationship? And the men have to think about that. They don't just pop their hand. Some men do that have already thought about it, but most men, they think about it and then they put their hand up. And it's a thought process, but they know they are. They don't want to be alone. So if you can get them to recognize that they were made for a relationship, the human relation that is the closest to us is the spouse. And if you spend the time to make an extraordinary marriage with your spouse, that is one of the joys of life. And if you don't, and you have a disastrous marriage, that's one of the worst things in life. So I'm trying to get them to recognize that they are made for a relationship and they need to pursue that relationship, and not just with their wives, but their wives are the number one thing. They better have that one straight. And that's through conversation, sharing your emotions, and not just to do this. I mean, that's not a relationship.
Right.
I know too, Ephesians 5 tells women that to respect their husbands. And I would say, if a husband's down at work full time, is he feeling respected at home, or is he going someplace else to just be able to feel some respect from somebody, and what he achieves, whether it's work or whether it's the softball team or whatever it is, they want to know that people respect them.
Right. What do you say? I love your wisdom to us married people. There's some single people watching, some never been married, some in their 40s, 50s, some who are widows. What do you have? Just give us some good nuggets for these people.
One, don't look for a marriage partner just because you're not married. That may not be what God has for you. You have 1 Corinthians 7, where Paul reminds us to at least think through the issue of whether our ministry is more important than even being married. Most people will get married, but depending on widowhood and the things like that, if you are interested in being married, I think the number one thing is become the person you want to marry, and that will be who you attract. So you're not just looking for a person, you're looking for a person with a strong character, and you want to have that character in order to attract somebody with that character. And somebody in the church, if you're in the church, you want to attract somebody who's in the church. And, being a humble, hard worker is good. And if God doesn't bring a marriage relationship, just recognize that being single may feel really lonely, but being married in the wrong marriage is going to feel far, far worse. You want to hold out for the right person and let God bring that right person.
Roxanne, what do you think? What do you say to them?
And I would say hang out in groups and observe.
And if you're not married, make friends with people of your same sex, whatever it is. If they're women, be in women's groups. That helps the relationship. Women going out with women is a different experience than going out with men, but it still helps the relationship, and everybody needs a relationship. That's central to the human psyche.
Right. You wrote a book, Bob. It's called Resolving Conflict in Marriage. And being a mediator, that's very powerful because we want to hear, about that book, ebook. And I want to tell everyone who's watching right now or listening, we're going to make this available to you for free. It's a free ebook. We'll give the link at the end of in the bottom of the Facebook or somewhere or on the podcast, and you can download it. Tell us about why did you write this book and what does it cover?
Why I wrote the book is because I'm a mediator and we also deal with marriages and there's conflict in marriages. Here's an easy way, just trying to make it as simple as possible. How do you get resolution of conflict? If you just have conflict in your marriage all the time, that's not a good solution. Well, how do you get resolution in discussion? You do need to talk about it. I'm absolutely think you have to talk about it. You can't just go into your corner and pretend it doesn't exist. But if you fight about it, that doesn't work either. So how do you resolve it? That's the goal, is to resolve this conflict. So we came up with 5 steps, simple steps that you have to go through. Anyway, I mean, I could have been more complex, but this is about as simple as I could make it. And of how you go through the process, and there's certain things you really do need to do.
What are they?
You want me to tell you what they are?
Yes.
Okay. The first step is to try and identify the problem and try to really clarify it as clearly as possible. Some people will talk around the bush a lot, and they won't really tell you what the problem is. So what's the real issue? And if you can put it in one sentence, that would be good. And some people have a very difficult time doing that, but that's a great, great place to start. Secondly, make sure the emotions don't become volcanic. When one side is yelling at the other side, or when both sides are yelling at each other, or even if just one side is yelling, you don't get anything done. You've got to calm those emotions down. And the way you do that is by telling them what their emotion is. You seem really angry on this subject, or you seem really scared. And if you get the emotion correct, they'll go, yeah, I am. And if you miss it, they'll say, no, you offended me. Oh, is that what it is? I offended you. Yes, that's what it is. And once you understand their emotions and actually name the emotion, they'll calm down because they think you're listening. So, and in the third step, that is exactly what you're doing, but you're going past that. First thing you have to do is calm those emotions down. But then the third step is you're listening with your head and your heart.
Mm.
And this is the hardest part. This is the part that doesn't seem normal, because usually we say, I want to tell you what I think and why I think it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you need to know what they're thinking. You know what you're thinking. You need to know what they're thinking. And if both of you understand each other, that goes a long way to get to the next step. So what you've got to do is really listen. And by your head, you're listening with your head. What does that mean? That means that you're listening to the words. What are they saying? What's going on? What subject are we on? Just
it's okay. We all have phones and messages.
Okay.
It's okay. This is, by the way, Laughter for All. So let me, before you continue the third point.
Okay.
Since you do marriage mediation, what is the funniest issue that came to you that really you wanted to laugh but you couldn't?
Having a phone call in the middle of a thing. I've been in speeches sometimes when a person is the speaker and he forgets to turn his cell phone off and he gets a phone call right in the middle of the cell phone. And I go,
If you were at my show, I would have went down, which I do. I would take the phone from the audience member, and I will talk to the person. And right away, people start shutting their phones off. Okay, so you mentioned the 3 points. The first point is try to say what you think is the situation in one sentence.
Right.
Number 2,
calm the emotions.
Calm the emotion. And number 3, that you want to
now you're starting.
Think with your head and your heart. Tell
right.
us more about that.
Okay, so listening with your head is, okay, what are they saying? Make sure you understand exactly what they're saying to try and understand what they're communicating. And with your heart, you're trying to figure out why. What's going on inside them that motivates them to go down this? Why is this so important to them? And so you're really trying to step into their shoes to figure out what they're trying to say and why it's so important to them. And that's a great question. Why is this so important to you? Because you already know what you think. And if you're just repeating it, that does absolutely no good. You need to understand what the other person is thinking, why they're thinking that way. And then when you get to step 4, you can make a proposal that you think may be acceptable. In other words, we have this stupid example, like I like chocolate, she likes vanilla. What kind of ice cream are we going to have tonight? And the question never is, are we going to have chocolate or are we going to have vanilla? But what kinds of things can we put on it? Maybe we can have a cookie by the side, maybe a chocolate cookie by the side. I eat the chocolate cookie, she eats the vanilla, and all kinds of ways to resolve this, trying to give both sides something that they can live with, at least live with, and hopefully agree with. And so you may come up with a new solution that just has never existed before, but you're just trying to come up with our solution to the problem. So just keep making these proposals until one of them finally says, yeah, I can live with that. I can live with that. And you will see that in all conflict, that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to come up with an agreement that both sides can live with. And the 5th thing is probably the most important. Just don't destroy the relationship. Under no circumstances, destroy that relationship. That's the most important thing. The conflict is probably not nearly as important as the relationship. We were made for relations, a relationship with God and with others. And almost no conflict is worth destroying the relationship. So make sure you keep the relationship, be respectful, be truthful, be disclosing, but make a proposal that you can live with, that you think the other side can live with. After we wrote this book, Roxann would come up to me sometimes and just state it. I have a proposal to make. So she knew, I mean, it came right out of the book. She knew she was making a suggestion, and if I liked it, I could accept it. And if I didn't like it, I could make a counter proposal. And so it was just kind of a funny way of saying, hey, I have an idea. How do you like this idea? So those are the 5 steps of trying to resolve conflict. And
do you think they work in other relationships, like father-daughter, or mother-daughter, or friends or parents? You think those 5 will work?
Yes. You do have to recognize a little, like any authority figure, that changes the dynamics a little bit, but you're trying to come up with something that works for the 2 or for the 3, or if you have a conflict with 5 members, try and get them all there. Try to get them on with some kind of solution. Like when we would go on vacation, we would say, okay, we have 3 kids. What do you want to do? And each one would pick one. And then we would say, okay, we're going to do all 3, but you better have fun when you're at your sister's one that she picked, and then she'll have fun when she's at yours, or when you're at hers. So they do work. You do need to get the real problem on the table. That's what we're trying to say, pinpoint the issue. So what's the real problem? Get that on the issue. And yelling at each other in all disputes, that doesn't do any good. So you've got to get you to the prefrontal cortex where the brain is working. And you do need to listen. What's the other person thinking? Almost always listening is the key element in solving these problems. And then after you understand where they're coming from, you can make a proposal. And it really doesn't matter whether it's marriage or business disputes. You're just trying to find a solution. Every mediation is different, but these are 5 things. Well, keeping the relationship is not always in lawsuit disputes.
Right. Roxann,
in marriage.
yes, thank you. That was great. Roxann, what do you say to a woman who said, I gave up? I'm just living there because I don't want a divorce. I give up. What do you say to
My blog
these
post
women?
tomorrow addresses that actually, because there is a hopelessness, and I think that number one is prayer, because a lot of it says what I believe about God. Am I trying to change the situation, or is it that I believe God is all powerful and can? And sometimes God acts in mighty ways. Sometimes he lands someone right on their tush, and so that they have to sit and think about what they are doing.
Sorry, to those who don't know, the word tush is a Baptist word for butt or behind. Just to clarify that, because I haven't heard that term in years since I was at the Southern Baptist. But go ahead. I'm so sorry I interrupted you. This is powerful. And really, it really means a lot, because I know people who are watching right now, they're in that boat. So go ahead. So believe in God. God has a better. He can do above and beyond what we can do. Go ahead.
God just shows them things, but sometimes he just lands them hard and until to where they really have to think and reconsider. I think some of it goes back, depending on what the situation is. We let's just say that it's a situation where the husband doesn't get a job, doesn't get a job, doesn't get a job, doesn't get a job, and the wife is like done with it. Is like, I'm tired of living like this. I'm tired. He needs to get up and do something. And then you trail it back and you find out that was actually what was modeled for him growing up, was a mom who took charge of everything and a dad who really couldn't hold a job, and then you go back into that. Why is it he can't hold a job? But when you see this man who that's all he's ever known, he may need a different model. And so sometimes it's God showing him that, whether it's bringing someone else, another man into his life, or just in whatever way, giving him hope. Because I agree, there are a lot of hopeless people out there. And
we need to fight. We need to fight for our hearts. A lot of things are coming at us today that are attacking our heart, and we need to recognize that we need to fight for our hearts and use God to help us to, connect with him. That's the first connection, but also our spouse and with others. And don't forget that our heart is under attack.
Right. I can't believe it's been an hour, but I can listen to you guys forever. And I want to encourage, before we do the benediction, tell us, how can people get a hold of you? How can they get your book? How can they get the ebook, which I will put a link to?
If they go to Amazon, that's our book. It's called The Marriage Dance. And Bob and Roxann Andersen. Andersen is S-E-N at the end. And, if you want to do it in a small group, there is a companion workbook. So the easiest way is just on Amazon. But to get hold of us, I would say go to www.themarriagedance.com. And we have goodies there that we just give away. One of them is the free downloadable ebook. So you won't get the pretty cover, but you'll get the contents. It's about 10 pages long, and it really goes into what Bob was
read it. Yes.
And so you can get that. You can get free marriage tips. Our tips are seriously 1 to 2 sentences long, and it just comes to your inbox, and just something for you to think about during the week and go, yeah, let's try that one. That's a good idea. We also send out a blog post that's maybe 400 to 600 words, something like that. So short, but a little bit more developed. And those are all free, just at themarriagedance.com.
And people can invite you to speak, to do seminars, to maybe do some virtual seminars now that people through COVID. Do you
Yeah,
do
we
that?
love doing that. We love doing that. We love coming for retreats or seminars. And right now, since COVID hit, every Sunday, actually, our life group that used to meet in person at our church is online. And we've had people from Texas and all over
And
come
from Grenada.
and
Grenada.
so yeah, if they even go to themarriagedance.com and just go to contact us and say, hey, how do I join your Zoom class on Sunday mornings? We'll send them a link and they can do
That's perfect. Bob, would you do a benediction that you normally
The
do?
the one I love is Jude's. So let me just read that. Now to him who is able to keep you from stumbling and to make you stand in the presence of his glory, blameless, with great joy, to the only God, our Savior, through Jesus Christ our Lord, be glory, majesty, dominion, and authority before all time and now and forever. Amen. I love
Amen.
that one.
Thank you guys so much for taking the time. I love it. What a great example of a great marriage. So I'm honored to be your friend and hope we can work together after this whole thing is over. So thank you for your time. And for you guys are listening, you can get a free, if you want the free copy, I'm going to put it in the comments in a little bit. And you can get your free ebook, How to Resolve Conflict by Bob Andersen. And also, if you want the actual book, The Marriage Dance, you can go to Amazon and order it. And if you want to do it as a life group or as a Bible study, you can order also the workbook with that. So also, if you every night, weeknight at 8:30 p.m. on Facebook, my personal page, Comedian Nazareth One, you can watch our show live with Naz. We are in our 135 shows already. So this is the show where you guys can become the comedians and forget about your problems. We laugh a lot, and then at the end, we'll ask you for your prayer request. And what else? If you want to support this program, there's you can go to patreon.com/comedian Nazareth, patreon.com, and become a member. I'm not a member, but actually it's someone who supports the ministry. So we thank you for that. Thank you guys for your time tonight. We'll see you next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time here on Comedian Nazareth. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.